Hi everyone, and thank you so much for checking out my brand new YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be talking about one of my favourite bands, Radiohead. When listening to Radiohead, it's easy to see why the band has been caught up in online incel culture in recent years. Incels, which is a shorthand for involuntary celibate, is a group of people, namely men, who have been unable to experience sex with a woman for a variety of reasons. They congregate on various online forums to bemoan their sexlessness and participate in increasingly misogynistic, dehumanizing, and often violent conversations about women. Radiohead's first and arguably most successful single, Creep, in many ways is the ultimate incel anthem. The song tells the story of a man who is pining over a woman, but he is so filled with self-doubt and self-loathing that he's unable to even speak to her. Instead, he grieves what might have been from a safe yet painful distance as he watches her live her life, blissfully unaware of his existence. Even though Thom Yorke wrote this song decades before the incel became into the cultural consciousness, it is unsurprising that Creep rings true to many incels. Thom Yorke famously hated Creep after its overwhelming success, as he felt the song had been warped beyond its original intentions and created a whole new dark meaning. Furthermore, Yorke expressed that the song became a huge burden to him and his bandmates, as they felt that all future work would be held up against Creep, with very high pressures to match its overwhelming and overnight success. On Radiohead's sophomore album, The Bends, Yorke dedicates an entire song to his hatred of Creep, called My Iron Lung. He named the song this way to create a metaphor for how Creep was both keeping him alive through monetary success and yet completely crushing and restricting him and his bandmates to a very tightly confined creative space. The Bends demonstrates Radiohead's determination to be so much more than just a one-hit wonder. With this album and all of their future works, Radiohead proved themselves to be a very competent, technical, expressive, and highly creative group of musicians. Many of their songs explore themes of loneliness, hopelessness, grief, and anxiety about the future, all of which are common themes for incels. This is why Creep and Radiohead in general have become heavily associated with incels and virgin men in general, being used as a cultural landmark that homogenized Radiohead fans into a cheap, mean-spirited stereotype. Undoubtedly, there is a mental health aspect to the culture of incels. They often struggle with serious depression, self-hatred, social anxiety, and unalive thoughts. Society has largely been unkind to them due to their status as adult male virgins, and cultural expectations on men make it more difficult for them to talk about their problems with trusted people. I believe that unaliving rates is so much higher for men than for women due to the compounding aspects of harmful gendered expectations for men. Firstly, men are expected to repress the emotions of sadness, hopelessness, and uncertainty, as it is seen as weak for them to admit to these feelings. Secondly, men are socially conditioned towards violence, as fighting and aggression are signs of dominance in the social order. These two factors combined make it much more likely for men to actually go through with ending their own lives, as they feel unsafe to express their despair, and they are socially more inclined towards acts of violence. These standards of masculinity in our culture have tragically failed men and lead them to be much less likely to seek help for their mental issues, which ultimately leads to their untimely and sadly often preventable deaths. I must admit that I don't really have a lot of sympathy when it comes to incels as a broad group, because they are shockingly misogynistic, use highly degrading language towards women, and more than a few of them have committed acts of violence and hate crimes against women. However, as individuals, I can see how many of them would have started as bullied, despondent, and cripplingly self-critical teenagers. There are larger social forces at work here, namely, patriarchy. The social construction of patriarchy is, in essence, men have dominion over and ultimate superiority to women in every regard. This includes the workforce, family life, and of course, sexual politics. In view of patriarchy, men can wield their dominance and rulership over women very powerfully during sexual relations. We see this play out in the trope of the male stud and the female slut. A man who is promiscuous is largely praised, especially by other men, but a woman who does the same thing is often shamed and punished socially for it. Sex as seen through a patriarchal and heteronormative lens is an exchange of power, with men being the ones who are actively orchestrating and controlling the act, and women are the passive receivers of it. In being dominant during sex, the man is actively asserting his superiority over not only the woman that he's currently with, but of the female gender at large. The woman is seen as his reward for upholding the structures that create male supremacy, and thus her personhood is faded into only what she can do to serve him. With this in mind, and taken into the context of incels, it's hardly surprising that so many of them resort to cruel, bitter-minded hatred against women. These men are in fact victims of the patriarchy themselves because they see themselves as having failed to uphold and perform one of the core principles of sexual politics, that being assert their dominance over women through sexual acts. They have been unable to find a willing female partner, and thus they are seen as utterly pathetic, useless, and weak by standards of heteronormative masculinity. They were deceived by patriarchy into thinking that sex is the most important and defining aspect of manhood, and therefore without it they transcend into self-loathing and vitriolic hateful scorn towards all women. In being denied sex, they have received the ultimate and most shameful insult from the very people who they were supposed to have control over, and so they feel cheated out of what they feel should have been their birthright. So they have the need to vastly overcompensate for the perceived lack of manhood and failure in the eyes of the patriarchy. In the most, this is done through perpetuating toxic and dehumanizing rhetoric about women. Now, to bring this back to Radiohead and their association with the incels, the fact of the matter is that women are fans of Radiohead too. Women's positions in male-dominated fandoms is commonly assumed non-existent or purely for male approval. In fandoms where women are the majority, they are almost always disproportionately higher amounts of scrutiny, ridicule, and dismissal by society at large. This is especially true if the fandom is mostly made up of teenage girls and young women. In the context of Radiohead, the male-dominant fan base has a vested interest in ignoring and excluding female participation, especially because of the band's association with men's lonerism and incels themselves. They see women as actively harmful to the fans' reputation, and commonly perceived ideals and values about the music itself. So for a male-dominated fandom like Radiohead to truly accept the fact that women can also enjoy and relate to this music independently and on a personal level, it's catastrophic to the patriarchal hierarchy. It also threatens the masculinity of people who fear being associated with anything feminine in the slightest. This fear was brought to the forefront of the fandom when Radiohead's song 15 Step was featured as the end credits song in Twilight. To society at the time, this film and book franchise were the epitome of loathsome, worthless, and offensively feminine artistic works. The song was included in the film because author Stephenie Meyer enjoyed listening to Radiohead and other alternative rock bands while she was writing the books. This posed a serious cultural moral conundrum for male Radiohead fans, as the misogynistic amongst them were forced to accept that they were now associated with a teenage girl-dominant fandom. The obvious choice for these men was enacted, and they disregarded, rejected, ignored these female fans even harder. Otherwise, they would have to admit that by sharing this interest with women, they are similar to women in ways that they would prefer to ignore. So instead, these kinds of men choose to dismiss female fans and actively suppress and deny their experiences of the music. This denial serves to uphold the patriarchal systems that place male-dominated music culture, and culture in general, to the most intelligent, refined, meaningful, and important, and it reinforces the oppression of women through ridicule and dismissal of their music culture and fandoms. I think it might be more valuable if we were able to consider why, in our culture, we feel so, repelled and embarrassed by the way that teenage girls express their jubilation for art. It's also crucial that while we acknowledge and seek to rectify the dangerous incel ideology, we do not in the process give up these important artists' legacy and association to them. As a society, we must work towards creating a culture in which men feel safe and worthy enough to express their mental health issues, and destigmatize the concept of the male virgin. By placing such a high social value on sex, it creates the problem of men feeling like failures if they are unable to sleep with a woman. This is true both in the context of shame of virginhood and when it comes to the celebration of men's promiscuity. We can and should work to reclaim and reshape the ideals of these artists in the cultural consciousness. Those who felt excluded from fan bases due to their gender or any other social marker for that matter should be given the freedom to express their love in inclusive spaces and in their own private worlds. With that said, I hereby reclaim Radiohead for women like me who felt alienated by and often actively threatened by the misogynistic and overly entitled men, many of which who fell into the incel category. I reclaim them for my younger teenage self who first got into Radiohead thanks to Twilight, and then properly started listening to them years later having rewatched the films. Create the kind of Radiohead culture that you want to see in the world, and don't let anyone ever take it from you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and please subscribe if you'd like to see some more videos about music, culture, society, anything like that, stuff that just catches my interest. Thank you so much, and see you in the next one. Was it not recording?